Aloha, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Faith and Family First. I'm your host, Eva Andrade. I'm here with my co-host, Marcus O'Shea. We've got a very special guest from them before us, Josh Wood, and you want to stay tuned to this conversation because you have no idea why the kids should be the most important thing in our life. So after today's show, you'll understand why. So let's chat about that. Oh, Josh, welcome to the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I remember seeing you just a few months ago when you were willing to do a webinar for us. Well, our first, actually.
My first Hawaiian webinar, so I'm honored.
Yeah. Well, we have to have you come back because I think people in Hawaii are still getting used to that whole webinar thing.
I'd be happy to.
All right. Well, let's do this first because I'm sure that we've got a lot of people that may not know who you are. So why don't you give us a little bit of a background? Who is Josh Wood? And then tell us, how did you end up being the executive director of Them Before Us?
So I served as a missionary in Charlotte doing sports ministry for 10 years prior to joining Elevation Church, where I was the outreach director for the whole church, which consisted of helping people serve their community, supporting really great nonprofits, and ultimately helping people to come to know the Lord. And it was there while I was working with Elevation that I met Katie Faust and Them Before Us. And I'll tell you, nothing will push you quicker into family ministry, the type of ministry that focuses on family as the keystone, the bedrock for all we do when it comes to giving and serving, philanthropy, generosity. Nothing will make you do that quicker than watching so much money get poured into so many things that don't fix the root of the problem. And that
Mm.
was my story. And so I joined as a volunteer first with Katie, helping her however I could. Then I was part-time, and eventually she roped me into full-time. She had just a wonderful vision to make sure that every single state in our union and as many countries around the world as we could would have support as they kind of battled the forces that were pulling apart the family to make sure that kids were defended and that they had a voice. And I said, I want to sign on. I want to help with that.
That is so awesome. You know what I love about Them Before Us? And I know Marcus was having fun playing on your website, so I'll let him make a few comments too. But one of the things I love about Them Before Us is for those of us that have been involved in the pro-life movement for a number of years, we continuously hear the argument, right, that it's my body, my choice. It's what is best for me. And we've seen that particular belief system has now expanded to where it's about everything, right? I mean, it's about end of life choices with assisted suicide. It's about adoption. It can be about IVF and all this stuff. But Them Before Us takes the conversation to what's important for the kids. So you want to talk a little bit about that and why that's so important in today's society?
Well, I guess it's so important because adults have this bad habit of leveraging the future of the most vulnerable around us to make possible in the present what they want really badly. And oftentimes the children pay this massive cost. And unfortunately, sometimes it's with their life. We see in reproductive technology that through programs like IVF that millions of children lose their life. Millions are suspended in frozen storage. And really, the child frozen on day three of life doesn't have anyone to speak up for them. And so, I guess the inspiration behind Them Before Us, why it's so important is because no one's doing it. There's not a voice for these children. Sometimes it's not their life. Sometimes they're just stripped of something they have a fundamental right to. Takes two people to create a child. That's their mother and father. 100% of all children born in the history of ever have had that. And we're in a situation now where it's becoming increasingly popular to strip a child of one of those two fundamental relationships. And man, we're at a sick point in society now where we're even celebrating it. We're calling it good. And I think that's biblical, calling evil good and good evil. We should have seen that coming. But our heart is to make sure that that child has someone to advocate for them in the church, in the public square, in the courtroom, with the legislators, to make sure that they're reminded that we have an obligation to protect the most vulnerable among us, and that's the child.
Yeah, Marcus, I want to turn it over to you because as a legislator of almost 20 years, right?
23
Oh,
years.
23, over
Oh,
23 years.
yes.
You saw a lot of bills just moving through the Hawaii legislature. And you've had the opportunity now to look at all the things that them before us are advocating for. Do you see some correlation between those things?
I do. That's why people like Josh, I really appreciate the work you folks are doing. You guys inhabit a very special space in our society today, but we forget about the children. And like you said, 100% of children, human beings, have come from a mother and a father, right? And so oftentimes it's vogue today to have this notion that you're entitled as an adult human being to have a child and have a family. I think that's what you're saying. It's forgotten about the child and the interests of the children themselves. That's what I found so profoundly important about the work that you do. As a policymaker, I've seen it. Over 20 years in the Hawaii State Legislature, one of the bluest states in the world, in the nation, surrounded by the...
People are born singing, country western music. That's how blue we are.
Well, we're in the blue Pacific Ocean, right? Most remote landmass, but heavily affected by California, of course. But the work that you folks are doing is to counterbalance what I see is a trend affecting all of us, affecting our society, affecting our families. So you people are filling a very special place in politics, with the legislature, and in the courts. I'd like to hear more about your activity in the courts.
Well, I'd say, it is one of our main roles. And look, we know state legislators have a lot on their plates. These guys have to cover the states are where it gets done, and they are oftentimes working a job and being a legislator. And so one of our roles here is to make sure that across all 50 states, we're monitoring legislation that would have a negative impact on children. And then, heck, we'd love to be on offense occasionally too, trying to promote things that actually help children. And so we do a lot of education, just helping people to understand some of the implications of some of the bills that they're about to pass.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you pass a law in your state that talks about having a right to IVF, which became really in vogue this past year, there's a lot of implications that come with that, where now you've got potentially a same-sex couple, for example, who says, I have a right to IVF, which means my insurance has to pay for it, which means if I'm a male and I have a male partner, I have to have my insurance pay for a surrogate. And what are the boundaries on this? Do I get to claim infertility? Am I going to have, it gets into this kind of, dystopian world very quickly. And so a lot of our time, we just actually spend time with the legislators saying, hey, we don't come from the perspective of a Christian. We don't tell them you're going outside God's design, so things are going to get really bad. But we do tell them, hey, we need to make sure that we're honoring the child in this conversation. So when you create a right to IVF, you're incentivizing. You're actually going to end up having the state pay for motherless and fatherless children. And that's not a business you want to be in. It's violating the rights of the most vulnerable in your state, and that's wrong.
And I think that also creates a problem for faith-based businesses, right? Who might have to also pay for this kind of stuff when it goes against their deeply held religious
they're going to have
convictions.
to face that issue of expansion of insurance and, of course, costs, right?
Right.
On mandatory, insurance benefits, right?
Yeah. Well, when you look at the numbers, though, Josh, this is what I find fascinating. So they're showing that more and more of our young people are now turning to the pro-life message. Do you see that there's a correlation among the young people and what they believe and actually all this craziness that's happening out there?
Well, I think insofar that a certain side of the spectrum has overplayed their hand. I think that sometimes you have luxury beliefs, so you push things on other people that you don't have to live with yourself. And so you can imagine, for example, really degrading the institution of marriage. That's been a popular thing to do with the elites for a very long time, even while many wealthy, educated people have the highest rates of marriage. So again, it's a place where the highest up recognize the value, how it gets them ahead in life, how it's best for kids, how they flourish when it happens. But they push this like, do whatever you want to do. Every path works. Everything's going to be fine. Your kids are going to be fine on everyone else. It's almost like do as I say, but not as I do, because what I'm going to do is get married, have kids after I'm married and stay together. And so I think after a while, the rank and file, the everyday person, the everyday family has just actually tasted some of these policies and said, I've been sold a lie. This isn't good. This isn't making my community better. Having more government in my life isn't a good thing. And we've actually seen people wake up and go, I'm done with this. I don't want any more intervention. I'm going to return to what I know to be true, which oftentimes is more conservative policies or religion, what they can grab onto that doesn't exist just in every human heart, but actually has been proved out over thousands of years. And I think that's a good thing. Although, you look at the politics today and it doesn't feel like that's that's a settled subject. I feel like there's still tons of division and we have warring ideas, especially as it relates to family, as what path to take as a nation.
Oh my gosh, yes. I'd love to know what your discussions were behind closed doors when that was the cheerleader, right?
Yeah.
That they found the baby in her in her closet or whatever. And
that was
all the young people I've talked to, and we've got our producer listening too. It's like I didn't hear anybody say when they heard the story, go, "Gee, she should have been offered an abortion so that didn't happen." They were all horrified that this life ended up being, snuffed out. And there was compassion for her as well, right? And what she might have been going through. But I'd love to know what the conversations were over there at them before us.
Well, I think
horror.
one thing that's unique about our perspective is that anytime adults want to shift the conversation to adults, to center the wrong victim. In this case, the primary victim is the child, and so I think that's the way we always come about it. Is I think first and foremost, it's a tragedy of the child. I think that's the key to so much of our discussions around every area of policy. Whether you have two adults who can't have a child, they feel really badly and they want to create a child, and they may fertilize 20 eggs, have 12 embryos on ice and freeze them perpetually, and they finally got to make a kid. There's this temptation always to feel like, well, in the case of abortion, this person won't get to live out their dreams, or this person, all these different things, or IVF, this couple can't have the child they want or build the family they want. Our perspective just tries to shift that. Even in marriage and divorce, well, I won't get to live out the happy life that I wanted. I'm going to live in a loveless marriage, instead of taking it and saying, well, we're going to ask instead, what is the best interest of the child? In the womb, it's to be born into a family that's loving and cares for them. In marriage, it's that the parents reconcile, do the hard work, put their lives back together, and have a happy marriage. That's a possibility. The data shows that I think it's something like 80% of couples don't regret staying together if they don't divorce after 5 years. So again, I think that's the piece that's missing in all of these conversations. It immediately goes to, how does the adult feel? How is the adult victimized? Instead of saying, the most vulnerable among us, what did they want? What did they need in this situation? And unfortunately, that's what happens when you're oftentimes in the womb or a couple days old. Is it's hard for you to have a voice.
Yeah. I know. Marcus. I know he's got a.
Well, no, I'm just going to comment on that because you hear about the greatest generation, right?
Right.
I think the generation today, I hate to say this, but is the spoiled generation, is the entitled generation, that they're the center of the universe, and their wants and desires, however fleeting it might be, take center stage, and to that's what you see out there. I mean, I see it.
I know you're right. I remember when we were fighting same-sex marriage here, we were doing one of our many long hearings. Marcus, you were still in office at the time. And I remember there were a lot of LGBT couples that came with their kids, right? Because they were really trying to show that they were family or whatever.
Yeah.
And I sat right across from this young family. So it was two gentlemen and they had two little kids. And I remember looking at them, and this goes exactly to the point that you're mentioning, Josh. I was looking at them, and I remember thinking to myself, there's no doubt in my mind that those two men love those two kids, because I was watching their interaction with them. And even I noticed that they seemed to have great love for each other.
Sure.
But I looked at the little girl that was nestled, and she was young, probably, I don't know, a little less than maybe 2 years. She was just kind of nestled into her father's arms or whatever. And I remember thinking to myself, that little girl is never going to know what it's going to feel like to nestle into the arms of a mom. You know, that feminine love. And my heart just began breaking for that child. And again, I wasn't doubting the love of the two gentlemen for the baby, you know, for their children or whatever. But my heart began to break for that little girl. And she's going to grow up without a mom to kind of steer her through all of the things that a young girl is going to go through.
And Josh, you folks do a great job. I watched the video on your website that portrays that, you know, that little girl is at a photo shoot for some kind of advertising campaign. And she starts to ask all these questions, you know, in front of the camera, and the camera guy's there picking all this stuff up. What about my siblings? You know, what about who's my mother? And it pushes the envelope, right? It says it in a very nice, subtle way, but that's the reality, right? What happens to these kids when they learn how they came about, right?
I think that's the misnomer sometimes, is that, well, you're hating on the two adults in that situation. And our issue is not with the two adults present. It's with the fact that one adult is always missing.
Right.
There is a parent
and purposely missing.
Yeah.
It's purposely created by law to exclude one.
Well, that's the crazy part, is that for decades, we had this institution that acknowledged loss, adoption. This is a tragedy, and we all have to band together to try to fix it. We're going to set up institutions to fix it. We're going to set up institutions to watch the child while we vet families to fix it, foster homes and foster placements, until we can make sure that you're adopted into a loving home. No one in that process would have ever licensed the purchase of children to place them into foster care. We would have never in a million years signed off as a society on the intentional creation of children through commercial purchase to be placed into these situations and taken from parents. But that's the weird world we live in today, where that loss, where one of those parents at minimum, right? Because sometimes it's two. At minimum, one of those parents, one of the mothers or the father is missing by transaction, by purchase. We're now actually at the point where it's not only accepted, it's celebrated, where you may lose your job, not be able to play for your sports team, if you don't say, nope, that's equal and it's good, when fundamentally you can't call equal what is unequal. No matter how you slice it, if the child had to lose their mother and father to be placed into that family, that is not the same. No matter how much propaganda you push, it's different. Yeah. And the child is the one who has to pay the price.
Right.
When we were talking about all the same-sex marriage battle and you were in the state house, did these kind of things come up? Like, was there discussion? Because Marcus is a Democrat, Josh. He's a born-again Democrat. So he I have to always say that because people find that hard to believe, right? But so the discussion did you have discussions in there about the child and them actually being put into a system where they were going to be missing out on one of the parents?
I don't recall having that discussion at all.
Wow. That just
it was all about love.
Well, Josh, why isn't love enough?
Well, the thing is, in an ideal society, the progressives play an important role of continuing to ring the bell for the marginalized to ensure that they have an opportunity to re-enter society. That has always been their historic role, and it's good. I think conservatives bring an important play an important role in our society as well. But what always has just perplexed me is how we have continually misidentified the victim. And it seems to me like progressives prefer the adults over the children. And again, I don't understand that because no one deserves that advocacy that I think in a lot of ways progressives try to champion. No one deserves it more than the child who, before they're even born, has been purchased and placed with two unrelated adults.
Well, isn't part of it too because, the progressives, they can easily dismiss that it's a child when it's still in the womb, right? They can say that's just an embryo, right? Or because all of their arguments about that. But what I don't understand, and I agree with you, Josh, is why can't we get them more on board even after the child is born with all this craziness that's happening? And I feel like you're right. They always go back to what is making the parent uncomfortable and how can we legislate their comfortability, if that's such a word.
Well, no, I think it's I go back to that spoiled generation. I think it's one of entitlement, and I think it's all about them before the children.
And they're becoming legislators now, that generation.
But so, and you describing them as progressives is great because that's not true Democratic philosophy. Let me tell you that.
Not in the old days.
I'm an old school Democrat. Okay, call me a Kennedy Democrat. Can I say that?
I don't. You can say whatever you want. We have free speech in this show.
But social causes, freedom of religion, freedom of association, due process, the rights of the most vulnerable, the aged, the blind, the disabled, children. Right.
Right.
That's basic. Right.
Right.
That's where we still are today. I don't know about some of these progressives. Again, I think they're kind of spoiled and entitled.
Well, that's why, and we're kind of a little bit off topic, but that's okay. No, because I do think it is important for, especially Democrats, because I know some Democrats that are moderate, and they stay silent. And I think that we need to have more people that are pro-life in the Democratic Party being willing to come out, and they need to start speaking up to the leadership in the Democratic.
Eva, unfortunately, conservatives and Republicans just went through this on their own ticket too, with calling so the basics IVF. We had this ruling in Alabama that said if you're going to do IVF, then every embryo. So that's what Christians believe, is that every life begins at conception, and embryos that are being tested, aborted, screened out for disease at day 3 or 4 of life is the ending of a life. And Alabama said our statutes, our Constitution in Alabama says that's life. So doctors, you're accountable if that life ends, which we would expect, right? If an accident happens, that might be different than intentional discarding or abortion, but we're essentially applying the rule of life to embryos. Everybody freaked out. And where were conservatives on this? Where were Republicans on this? They did a little bit of what progressives do, which is I'm going to adapt my belief about science, my belief about life to my ideology.
Yes.
And we cowered.
I like this, man.
Instead of saying I'm going to let the Bible and I'm going to let truth guide me, and I'm going to bend policy around it. We did the same thing. I think that's a condition of every human heart. We want what we want really badly, and that's why this message is so needed for the left and right.
I know one of my board members, and they'll know who they are. I don't need to mention them by name, but we were talking about when we were going to have you do our webinar. They they went to the website to check, and we had our first ever conversation about IVF. It had never happened before. And now we have very strong conservative board members. And one of them said, well, why would we be against this? And we had to have this real in-depth conversation about it. And because one of our board members is Catholic, he was explaining, this how important and the value of human life and how it becomes a commodity. Right? Mm-hmm. Suddenly now there's dollar signs attached to it where you have surrogates that are doing it specifically just to make money and all of that. And this board member said, more pastors need to have this conversation because people are not doing what you just mentioned, Josh. People are just not talking about it.
Yeah. The church has to update its apologetic. I mean, it is the moral duty of pastors to be on the cutting edge of the ways in which humanity is going to violate the least among us. And Christ says, fear the millstone. It's the person, it's the children that if you cause them to stumble, I'm going to reserve this terrible punishment for you. He clearly has a defensive eye towards our children. And if there are things going on in our society that people are knowingly participating in and calling it good, and the church is not the first in line to say that is wicked, that is evil, it must be stopped, then we're asleep at the wheel. And
Preach
so
it.
that's part of our responsibility at Them Before Us, is to say, do you know the data? Do you know that 93% of embryos will never be transferred? Do you know that 10 million embryos are frozen on ice and 30% have lost contact with the person who put them there? Do you know that? Do you know that it's only criminal in 8 states right now for a doctor to swap their sperm in for the father that's intending to father the child? Only 8 states is that criminal, because it's the Wild West. So we need the church to wake up. If the church isn't speaking up and risking their political capital, their friendships to defend these children, do we really expect the everyday person to do that?
So in a blue state like Hawaii, give us like 3 things that we should start paying attention to, learning, and maybe moving to. Because we're not going to get anything through our legislature immediately. But I know you have a call to action for us blue states. So what would that be?
Well, I think people can't make great decisions without information. And so I think everyone should be for transparency, right? Republicans, Democrats. And so first, just saying, hey, fertility clinics, I just want to know how many embryos you have on ice. I just want to know how many are getting discarded. They're not lives anyway, right? So can you just tell me how many are being discarded? How many get thrown away for being boys instead of girls? How many are getting screened out for disease? How many result in a live birth? That would do wonders if people just understood how ineffective this treatment is. How many families go home with embryos on ice? How flippantly embryos, this is children on day 3 of life, are discarded. Things would really begin to change. And then I would say be on guard with language. Really challenge anytime you see us moving away from mother and father to parent and intended parent. We need to reject that out of hand. That kids don't have parents. Kids have a mother and a father. And anyone who says differently is trying to place a child into a situation where they've lost one of those two. That's why they made it neutral. So again, I'd say be on your guard with language. And then in all of these cases, let's really push for transparency so that these terrible actions don't get to live in the dark.
And I want to add something in there as we've already run through our 28 or so minutes. I cannot believe it. So we definitely have to come close. But I want to add something to that, Josh, because here in Hawaii, the Native Hawaiian people are very concerned about what happens to Native Hawaiian babies. And so that transparency, if we knew how many of those babies were Native Hawaiian, they'd want to know, are they being taken and treated with care? Right? Because that's what's important to them. So thank you for that call to action, Josh. We really appreciate your time with us today. And in this last few seconds, give us a message of hope.
Well, I mean, I think more than anything, I want to believe that if people knew and understood our message, that it is actually the true path to happiness and fulfillment when you lay your life down. This is ultimately the Christian message, that in losing our life, we find it. I do think we begin to turn things around. But, as you guys shared, we live in a spoiled generation that has bought the cultural lie that if I get what I really want, regardless of whether it's in line with God's truth, I'm going to finally be happy. And that causes us to put a lot of idols of ideology, whether it be, sex, gender, race, you name it, above everything else in our lives. And that's a vain and endless pursuit that doesn't end in happiness. So I said it would be helpful. My hope is that people would give it a try. What does it look like to sacrifice, to put others first, and to live by a truth that doesn't live in your own heart? And I know that if people did that, they would find they are much happier on the other side than what the world is selling them right now.
You can find out more about Josh and Them Before Us at thembeforeus.org. So make sure you visit them on their website. Like this video, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know every time we upload a new video. And we will see all of you next week. Mahalo, Josh, for your time.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.